Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to have you all join us for today's webinar on how to gain business confidence amid trade uncertainty, sponsored by Oritain. I am your host for this afternoon, Connor O'Brien, and I am the Sustainability Policy Coordinator with the American Apparel and Footwear Association, and I'll be guiding us through today's session. To kick things off, a quick overview of AAFA. We are the National Trade Association representing apparel, footwear, and other sewn product companies and their suppliers, which compete in the global market. Representing more than 1,100 world-famous name brands, AAFA is the trusted public policy and political voice of the apparel and footwear industry, its management and shareholders, its more than 3.6 million US workers, and its contribution of more than $523 billion in annual US retail sales. We drive progress across three key priorities, namely brand protection, supply chain and sourcing, and trade logistics and manufacturing. AAFA approaches this work through the lens of purpose-driven leadership in a manner that supports each member's ability to build and sustain inclusive and diverse cultures, meet and advance ESG goals, and draw upon the latest technology. So if you do encounter any technical issues during today's webinar, please contact Zoom support. For your convenience, we are recording this webinar and we will make both the recording and the presentation slides available in AAFA's Learning Center within 1 to 3 business days. We do, of course, value your insights and questions, so please feel free to share them throughout today's presentation using the Q&A box found in your Zoom toolbar. We will address all questions during our dedicated Q&A segment at the end. With that said, I'm pleased to welcome our expert speakers today. So joining us from Oritain are Anna Hinojosa, the Executive Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs, and Ben Tompkins, the Regional Vice President of the Americas. Prior to joining Oritain, Anna was the Executive Director at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, where she was responsible for directing CBP's Trade Threat Assessment Units, special investigations, and enforcement programs focusing on detecting, deterring, and disrupting illicit trade, with a special emphasis on forced labor violations, evasion of special tariff cases, and modernizing the use of civil penalties to ensure appropriate consequence delivery for non-compliance. Ben works extensively in the commercial client engagement team, working with major brands and retailers and implementing origin verification programs within the US market with a focus on textiles and apparel. So today, Anna and Ben will be sharing valuable perspectives on the latest updates on trade policies, tariffs, and enforcement trends, unforeseen risks with pivoting current production models, and on how having the right data and verified insights boosts business confidence. And now I am pleased to hand things over to Anna and Ben to begin today's discussion.
Thank you, Connor.
Thanks so much, Connor. So hi, everyone, and welcome. Anna, incredibly excited for today's conversation. I think for the audience, hopefully it's not going to be death through sort of presentation and a number of slides, just sort of a very open and honest conversation. Bad thing for the audience, you have to see at least my face in a much closer up angle, so I apologize for that in advance. But I think to kick us off, it probably goes without saying, significant amount has changed, particularly even over the summer. Probably understatement of the decade. Just to list a couple of the things that have happened. We've had the EU and the US enter into a trade deal. India and the UK have signed a free trade agreement. De minimis has ended, and that's all before the word tariff is even mentioned, which of course has hit some of the largest apparel producing nations across the globe. And with that, we've really seen a lot of businesses that are facing a lot of uncertainty, potential impact on revenue, growth, competitiveness. Some are slowing down orders, pausing expansion plans, reshoring, upending existing supply chains and searching for potentially new ones. All at the same time as having to deal with greater enforcement as well. Increased requirements around rules of origin. I mean, the list truly does go on. So as a regulatory expert, Anna, given all that's going on in the world, could you help us frame the current global trade environment for everyone?
Yeah, I kind of feel like, thank you, Ben. I kind of feel like it's going to be a little bit of rehashing a painful experience for everyone, because everybody has been suffering in one way or another since, with all of the kind of fluctuations, as you called it, this year. But I think maybe there's a few areas that would be worth mentioning that maybe not everybody's focused on. So clearly tariffs. I think that AAFA has been wonderful in hosting a number of webinars that have been trying to help its members really understand some of the impact. I think that U.S. retailers are definitely watching their lead times, and they're watching their lead times stretch. They're really trying to see how they can deal with the various compliance and regulatory requirements. And of course, sourcing costs are fluctuating quite a bit. There's a lot of introspection as to are you sourcing from the right place? Do you have manufacturing in the right place? At the same time, the government agencies are being asked to take more enforcement action. Obviously, when tariffs go up, those that are leaning towards maybe not paying them in a legal way, find that it's a little bit more of an incentive to cheat. And so the government is very keenly aware that all of these different changes, including the elimination of the de minimis channel for importation, has now provided a higher incentive for importers to maybe try off of, or maybe not be as accurate in what's being declared. I think CBP, for one, has been very clear that there is quite a bit more enforcement going on in actually monitoring and having oversight over the declarations that importers are presenting. This has been clear as well that it's, as we had kind of gotten used to the forced labor monitoring and the forced labor oversight, but now with tariffs and other issues like the de minimis elimination, the enforcement is now focused on still forced labor. I know there was a kind of a lull there for a bit where many importers thought BP's off of forced labor, but clearly that's not the case. So forced labor is still something that the agency is very focused on, and as responsible businesses, so should all of the importers who are responsible for ensuring that they're not importing goods produced with forced labor. Other topics have been, I think, in the news, but maybe some companies are not as focused on it. The issue of transshipment. Just to very briefly differentiate, it's okay to move goods from one country to another to be imported into another country. That's technically transshipment, but what the agency is concerned about is what would be considered an illegal transshipment, where the purpose of moving those goods or parts through other countries is really to hide their origin or hide their processing. And so those types of illegal transshipments to try to get a non-earned tariff benefit, or have to declare other duties or different requirements that would be required if the correct information was known as to the origin of those goods. Those things are being looked at much more carefully by the government these days, as well as the associated duty evasion. I hope everybody saw some of the declarations or the press releases from the Department of Justice, where they have published the fact that they have established a task force to focus specifically on this type of duty evasion and other trade frauds. So the stakes are high. I mean, I think that the incentives for people who are willing to cheat are high, but the stakes and consequences for doing so are much higher. So I would say, beware for those companies who are feeling flexible about their declarations. Be very careful. I have had the opportunity to speak to some companies who are trying to explore being creative in ways to maybe do some tariff engineering or tariff structuring so that they can benefit from different operations in different countries. That's legal as long as what you're doing is accurate and not just hiding, again, putting a different name on the same operation. I think also the consequences of some of these movements are really important. And so I think with forced labor, we had already elevated the importance of compliance, of trade compliance, to the C-suite. more so now as tariffs have increased. The C-suite is now keenly aware of the decisions that are made as to where to source from have bottom line implications. I think that the implications of cheating, I'll call it that, should be also very keenly kind of raised to the awareness of the C-suite, because ultimately when the Department of Justice is involved, it's the CEO or the CFO, or the C-suite is actually who's held accountable for some of these actions, even if they're not the ones actually perpetrating the slight adjustments to the reality that's declared to the government. I think also, just to not stretch this question on so long, I think that we saw that CTPAT put out an alert in July, also reminding companies and CTPAT members that there is an increased visibility or increased monitoring of transshipment of goods. It's no secret the government is aware and does follow different trends of where goods are shipped and shifting. And so they will be looking at where some of these geopolitical realities are having an impact in volumes of trade, routes of trade, and changes to that effect. So I think whether it's forced labor, evasion of anti-dumping and countervailing duties, which is huge, and other legal movements, that the tendency to want to hide the true origin of a raw material or a foreign or a finished product, like through transshipments, that the expectation of transparency and traceability in the supply chain be acknowledged as a must, a requirement. It's not a choice anymore. And I know we've done quite a bit of progress in that with regards to forced labor, but now it matters even more.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And given how much there is to unpack with all that's going on, we'll definitely try to chip away at some of that throughout the conversation. I think great around, and we'll come to it as well in terms of the impact at C-suite level and sort of what they're looking at, what they might be focused on, and how we can help the organizations achieve some of those goals, but also the liability that it brings now, given the fact that we're sort of DOJ, Department of Commerce, etc. Just sort of diving a little bit deeper onto the point around transshipment specifically. Recently, in a joint statement released by the US and the EU, to your point, I think this speaks to greater enforcement here. But both sides said that they'll negotiate rules of origin and crack down on duty evasion and transshipment. How should apparel and textile companies prepare for these upcoming changes? What might they look like? Can you shed any light there?
Sure. I mean, I think I think there's a strong indication, even from the Trump administration, that whether it's the Commerce Department or DHS or the Treasury Department, they are very much focused on what they're seeing happening from a geopolitical perspective. And even as some of these tariffs were being put in place, I'm calling it a threat, probably not the right word, but the indication that there could be additional penalties put in place for goods that are identified as illegally transshipped goods, where declarations were done in a way to evade some of these tariffs. These additional penalties are a clear recognition that they know what's happening. They understand, some of the routing of how it's happening, and they're keenly aware of how it can be identified. I would expect that there will definitely be stricter content restrictions on some of the future free trade agreements that are negotiated. A lot of the realities of what's happening around the world are being factored in by the government, and probably should be as well by the brands and importers. The fact that many manufacturing operations, be it in Mexico or in Vietnam or in Cambodia, are owned by third countries, whether it's China or another country, those don't go unnoticed. And of course, when you have a situation where you're trying to look at complying with a particular free trade agreement, I've had the opportunity to speak to a number of industries, and I have often espoused the benefits of striving to be eligible for the free trade agreements, especially like USMCA. The benefits of being really eligible for USMCA can be many, not the least of which is a lower duty rate, but also with these additional duties, there's exemptions for eligibility under USMCA. That also creates an incentive for claims to be a little bit loosey in what actually qualifies and doesn't qualify. So really important to what the rules of origin are for free trade agreements. Obviously, the government knows that these are places where importers might cheat, or and so they will there will be much more stricter review of eligibility for those types of claims. I think that we've also seen that there will be a lot more enforcement coming forward with regards to UFLPA. When there's a perceived chaos, people who are looking to bring in goods that are not as compliant perceive that at the time of chaos is a good time to slip things in. I think the agency CBP is aware of that, and they'll be carefully monitoring goods to evaluate whether or not they are in fact eligible under UFLPA. I think with all of these tariffs and some of the changes, there are certainly consequences across the world, but even in the US. I had the opportunity to work with the US Cotton Council over the last 2 years, and I got to hear very keenly the impact that cotton as a commodity and the prices of cotton around the world have on being able to sell it, to use it. And I used to think it's so easy, it's like the gold star of cotton, and if you buy it and use it in your product, you'll avoid problems like UFLPA problems or other forced labor concerns. But now with the extra tariffs, some of the incentives with buying U.S. cotton seem to have melted away, because the fiber gets converted into a different country of origin. And so interesting to watch the Buy American Cotton Act that is pending out there. We certainly will be monitoring that from a Texas girl who loves her cotton farmers. I hope that they get whatever reprieve they need in order to keep that industry going. I think also, it's been a while that we've gotten away from give us a certificate of origin and we'll just believe that. I think that the need for transparency in supply chains and traceability of those supply chains down to tiers that many importers never thought they would get to, but they have. It is very important. And so I think really being introspective about how much do I know my supply chain, how much do I know who's in my supply chain, and how can I demonstrate that to CBP, to another enforcement agency will be very important as we tackle through all of this fluctuation.
Yeah, it seemed, at least from my sort of view, UFLPA, huge catalyst, sort of driving a lot of the industry towards building sort of a better and more robust toolkit as part of their due diligence and traceability approach. But incredible to see sort of the secondary impacts that tariffs and these new trade agreements and policies are having that actually increase the need for rule of origin and actually incentivize greater traceability to be able to leverage those particular policies that are maybe coming up as well. And very interesting on sort of that Buying American Cotton Act as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, switching up a little bit, we're obviously seeing a lot of supply chain diversification at the minute, probably in response to tariffs and some of the legislative flux that you just mentioned. Part of that can also bring on board new vendors, potentially unvetted vendors, new countries of operation. When such shifts are sort of happening within production and potentially even that quickly, what risks do you think can be overlooked, particularly within sort of a short to medium term view?
I think that some of the typical risks that companies had in the past are still a factor, but now with increasing tariffs, I think importers are having to look at those supply chains a little differently, where before it was just the cost of what the manufacturing or the finished product was going to cost. Now they definitely have to factor in the consequences at importation, the additional tariffs that might be required, and what other options there might be, whether their favorite manufacturer in a particular country gives them the best price, gives them the best quality, but because of where they are, that's gonna bring about a substantial increase in the price of the goods. I think all of those are things that brands, importers are having to consider, and deciding whether it's worthwhile making a change or waiting it out. I know that we're all waiting to see what the Supreme Court's going to decide in November and where that's going. So we'll see what happens there, but certainly the fact that companies are now having to manage, even in a very company managing anywhere from 5,000 suppliers to 8,000 suppliers, big undertaking to manage, especially if you're a company that's really focusing on selling a product. You're not really focusing so much on the manufacturing and supply chain traceability that is required. So I think suppliers are having to really consider where in reality are our suppliers. Are the suppliers, even though you're being invoiced from a particular country and the goods are being shipped from that particular country, are those goods really being made from that particular country, and are the raw materials from where you believe they are? I think those are important questions. With the current dynamics, where's our biggest exposure? Is it forced labor? Is it evasion? Is it additional duties? Is it quality? Obviously, if you're in China, are any of these folks on the UFLPA entities list? And is that going to cause you to not be able to receive the goods? That's super important. And I mean, I think no matter what, brands are run by humans, and we all are concerned. My Texas cotton farmers, I think many brands are concerned about the factories that have been servicing them for many years, and the impact that many of these things in some cases that's going to be very difficult. So those are some of the concerns that I think are maybe top of mind for some of the companies.
That's really helpful. And yeah, we've definitely seen an impact and sort of a tectonic shift that's happening within global sourcing that might be due in part to tariffs. You obviously have some countries that are favorably potentially impacted by some better tariff situations, and we're seeing a lot of demand shift to those particular countries, whether it be Cambodia, Bangladesh, Pakistan. India was potentially going to be one of those high demand countries, but obviously then came that 50% rate. So those are potentially countries that have a lot more demand placed on them, but maybe not the immediate capacity to meet that demand, which in turn could also lead to a lot of subcontracting, potentially new vendors going out to the open market to source new material, yarn, cotton, etc., which can obviously open up more risks within the supply chain. And then on the flip side of that coin, you also have some of those countries that are disproportionately impacted by tariffs, and now they're trying to become more price competitive. And that can also then lead to subcontracting and new supply chains, potentially cutting corners, and some of that can then unfortunately incredibly impact human rights violations, or again bring in new risks to the supply chain as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to sort of see as we continue to go throughout the next few months, just sort of how that washes out. And then you overlay all the global trade data that's happening at the same time. Where is this cotton moving to? It's definitely an interesting space to be in. Great. So switching up, at least when we sort of think about due diligence and traceability, we really see robust sort of processes as sort of a 3-pillar strategy. I guess first sort of pillar being supply chain mapping, incredibly important to know from sort of a tier-to-tier perspective, where are the goods coming from, having an amalgamation of all that documentation, certificates of origin, transaction certificates, etc., all housed in one place. Second pillar is really around some of that entity screening. So being able to ensure that there's no financial connections or nexuses within your supply chain to any banned entities. And then thirdly, which is becoming more and more important, particularly given the investments that CBP has made, but around that forensic verification. And so sort of question for you, Anna, we do tend to see a bit more of a reliance, and maybe it's sort of a maturity or bandwidth, capacity, resource sort of question, but a little bit of sole reliance on some of those mapping and digital-based tools, which, as we know, with that form of verification can leave you exposed to significant risk as well, because the document or supplier declaration doesn't necessarily guarantee the origin of the material. So just trying to get your thoughts on that, that you'd be able to share with us.
Yeah, well, I think, as we've been talking, even just in this little short time, we've been talking about how the risks for importers have significantly increased, kind of exponentially over the last 5 years. And I mean, we haven't even talked about, export, sanctions and other types of areas that are also a concern for importers. I think for smaller companies, it may be possible for them to manage those 5,000 to 100 plus thousand. The small company could potentially have enough control over their suppliers to try to manually figure out who all is in their supply chain to the level of detail that the government expects an importer to have in order to exercise reasonable care or due diligence. But so most companies, it's very difficult for them to do manually. So rightfully, many companies have turned to some of the, I think what you refer to as digital transparency tools and companies that are available to do that. Excuse me. Sorry. That are offering those services. I think that there are the concerns about certificates of origin. I think certificates of origin are very important. And I think they're very important because it requires a responsible person within the company to sign that what the statements are true. Okay, obviously there could be some inaccuracies there as well, but ultimately, when somebody from a company has to actually, a senior person in that company has to actually certify that certain things are true, hopefully there's a little bit more responsibility put into that. But they've been duplicated so many times, they've been used so loosely that the value of them for purposes of the government believing the claim has somewhat eroded. And so CBP in particular, but other government agencies as well, are aware that there are supply chain transparency companies that are able to do an amazing job of being able to tier one and see who do business with who, and actually do some of that entity vetting to illuminate where there's risk in the supply chain, especially as it relates to UFLPA connections, where it's important for a company to know not to do business with an entity that you're not going to get those goods through. But ultimately, there's some great companies out there. Our friends at Altana do a great job. Other companies out there that are doing great at really helping an importer even identify who their tiers are working with and what the level of risk is there. But ultimately, the only way to demonstrate that the goods that are being sent from those tiers in the manufacturing process are as compliant as you think, you really need an origin verification. And I think, of course, Oritain does a fantastic job at providing that forensic verification. And I think it makes a huge difference in keeping the the mills honest, the fabric makers honest, the cut and sew manufacturers honest. And I think it's obviously nobody can do 100% of their products, but that allows with manufacturers and suppliers is super important to ensure compliance and to demonstrate true due diligence in your work.
Yeah, and clearly we're not biased on that final component around the need for forensic verification. Not that there's Oritain sort of plastered left, right, and center on these screens here. But hopefully speaking to something that's a little bit more non-biased, obviously CBP's investment into isotopic testing themselves. I think that's also a sort of a show and a declaration around the importance of having a degree of physical verification that's scientific based, irrefutable. I know that's also pushed a lot of the importing community into, okay, well, what can we do to also overlay verification within that sort of toolkit? Because all three parts of that pillar strategy are sort of a critical foundation to have when trying to sort of address traceability, given all of the regulations. Okay, you sort of mentioned sort of opening around the importance and obviously how this is becoming a C-suite level discussion because of the bottom line revenue impact that trade, tariffs, and traceability has. Given that current climate, the importance of those three T's, what are some of the strategic questions that CEOs or boards should be asking their teams right now?
Good question. Good question, Ben. I mean, I think the basic question should be, is our compliance team organizationally aligned in the right place in our company? I know I personally have seen, because I'm old and I've been in the biz for over 35 years, the compliance person, used to be attached somewhere in the logistics team in a warehouse somewhere and did their work there. But obviously in the last, 10 years, 5 years, that the stakes have changed, and definitely in the last year, the importance of the decisions that the compliance team makes or leads have huge consequences on the company, on the brand, on their bottom line. And so really understanding where the compliance team fits is super important. And then after that, I think asking the question whether you really know whether your suppliers are providing legitimate information, legitimate products, legitimate resources or raw materials is super important. If we were asked, and many companies now are starting to receive CF-28s or requests for information. In the past, in the early days when I was with U.S. Customs, we sent out for minor things, classification here, a little question on valuation there. and they didn't have the significance of what CF28s have today. Today, but because of so much work that CBP has, for them to actually go out with a CF28, it's a serious concern. So it's not just, oh, they're just checking on my classification. There are some serious interests behind those CF28s, and generally there are some value aspects or some forced labor aspects behind it, and probably will have some interest from the regulatory audit division. And the questions are much more complex, they're deeper, and getting into a lot more about the supply chain than they ever have before. I think CEOs and boards need to understand the real costs of detention. A lot of times it seems like, well, it's just going to hold that one shipment for a little bit, and we're going to get to the client a little bit later. We actually did a white paper called The True Cost of Detention, where we analyzed how costly detentions are specifically for textile detentions. And it surprisingly, obviously we did some of this through some surveys of our clients. And surprisingly, we found that getting a shipment released, unless you're a Oritain client, getting a shipment released out of detention for a forced labor concern can take anywhere from 1 week to up to 4 months. Now, 4 months of a fashion shipment being detained is a season lost, I'm sure. And the costs of detentions, between demurrage fees and other associated costs for inability, not getting the container back, and losing access to the merchandise, can really add up. Most companies have chosen to export the goods as quickly as possible, even if they think they have a good claim for getting those goods released. The cost of detention is just so high that many companies just choose to export the goods until they can sort things out and try to be able to provide a comprehensive admissibility package to get those goods released for future shipments, because it's so difficult to try to get that done in a timely fashion while the goods are detained. That's for one shipment. Generally, if you already have multiple shipments coming into the U.S., then all shipments are going to be detained, and that's only going to exponentially increase the cost of those detentions. So I think that the costs are pretty high, and the stakes of a CEO and a CFO knowing where they stand, where their risk is with regards to enforcement related to trade, tariffs, forced labor, anti-dumping duties, fraudulent claims. They're huge. Their investors are going to be interested in that. The board is definitely going to be interested in that. And their survivability as a CEO is going to depend on that.
That might call some action.
Yeah.
But I think really great answer there. And just probably have another 3, 4, 5 minutes just for the next question. And just definitely want to make sure that we get to some of those audience the questions. So just coming in to, final question here. I think we've obviously, with the title of this particular webinar has really been battling some of the uncertainties due to trade, tariff, etc. There's sort of a leave behind for the audience we have today. How can businesses build that resilience and confidence into their supply chain, given all the constraints and issues and complexities that they're having to deal with currently?
Well, I mean, I think a very important thing is, and I'll mention that CBP has an expectation that an importer is exercising reasonable care or due diligence by informing their suppliers of the requirements, to ensure that the suppliers, you're holding your suppliers and they're holding their suppliers for complying with the rules. So provide education, clear guidance in your contracts or in your purchase orders as to what what is expected is a good way of starting on the right track. If you are doing some sort of forensic testing, making sure that you advise your supply chain that you are doing that testing, because that will actually be an incentive for them to comply, to not substitute raw materials or put things into your finished product that shouldn't be there. Or I think a lot of times the consequences of substituting materials aren't really keenly aware overseas. It just seems like a detail, but it's not a detail, because in the end it could mean an importer having to pay 4 times as much duties than they would have paid if a different material had been used in the goods. I think it would be good to share that we just recently did a traceability study, and I think it'll be released in not too long from now. And the survey that we conducted, 43 of the companies said that they still see price as a barrier for traceability. But the real question is, what's the price of not investing in traceability, in true traceability, and deterrence from non-compliant materials being put into your supply chain? I think that the cost is very high. I think the concept of trust but verify is really important. Obviously, when we're doing business deals, we want to be able to trust people that we're partnering with, but that needs to be clear. For whatever reason, we have to be able to also verify that what you're saying to me is what I'm getting, and that will allow us to continue our relationship. I think more and more, given all the geopolitical challenges that are happening around the world, the awareness of the consequences has kind of the lower levels of the supply chain. Good communication, good training, raising awareness, going to visit your manufacturers, I think, is a really important factor, and really treating transparency and traceability more like an insurance policy, to ensure that if you are in fact checking your supply chain and knowing who's in your supply chain, that's actually going to save you a lot of money in the long run. I think that's really, really important. I don't know if I answered all your question. I kind of got lost in my traceability and transparency speech to you.
No, it was perfect. And yeah, I think just on your last point, sometimes we get the dreadful question at the end, sort of, or on a Friday afternoon when their house is burned down, that, okay, now I need insurance. And so it's just trying to create that business case as to actually it's worthwhile investing in something ahead of time to hopefully proactively mitigate the risk of the back end issues happening, which can, to your point, not only the cost of detentions, but all of the secondary costs that come with that as well. So anyway, it feels like the Emmys. I feel like the music has come on. Connor's back on. Want to make sure that we pause, take some audience questions. So thank you so much.
Before you close me out, I do want to say one last thing. I think that it's important to, as we think about, are things going to settle? Are we going to not need to have this level of transparency? The answer is no. You will still need to have this level of transparency and traceability into your supply chain. And so when the question is, when are you going to start investing in making sure that you've taken it far enough to be protected?
That's great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for such an informative presentation, Anna and Ben. So it's now time to hear from you all, our audience. So your questions and perspectives are, of course, valuable to this discussion. So please continue to share them through the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible before the end of this webinar, but our speakers will follow up by email with any questions we don't get a chance to cover today. So let's go ahead and get things started. So do you foresee an additional tariff on Chinese inputs into Vietnamese produced goods, i.e. Chinese fabric shipped to Vietnam to be made into a dress?
For me?
I'm going to
For
defer
either of you.
regulatory expert
Okay,
to Anna.
thanks, Ben. Um, I think I think I'm going to say it's not going to happen in the next month or two. I think we may not see anything until after the November situation. I'm gonna say let's see what happens in November before we find that out.
And Anna, just the impact if that is an effect, well, how do you think that's going to impact the community?
Like do um it's still a little unclear. I mean, I do think that rules of origin are not something that are dictated by executive order. You know, the United States is part of a convention on rules of origin, which is a more international um, instrument, and I think very valuable to the US that we are part of that because it helps us understand how other countries are determining origin as well when we're all in a harmonized way of establishing the rules of origin. Um, you know, concerns about the WTO off the table at this point. I think the rules of origin are important, and I don't think we want to overlay tariff with origin. I think assessing an extra origin. I mean, I guess it like we're doing for aluminum and other inputs, it could happen, but I'm thinking that more than likely it will be more that the tariffs will be against Vietnam, and those tariffs will be reflective of what the administration believes are the origin of the inputs that are going into the products coming out of Vietnam.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, unfortunately, nobody has a crystal ball on this one. All right, next question. A kind of a logistical question here. So Oritain can provide supply chain mapping, entity screening, and forensic verification, question mark. Additionally, this person's product is majority polyester and recycled polyester apparel. What enforcement should they be on the alert for?
You're
Ben,
right.
go ahead and start.
Yeah, just a clarification. So Oritain is very much focused on forensic verification component. We work sort of collaboratively with those other parties that provide solutions in mapping and entity screening. Recycled polyester in terms of actually testing just the polyester component isn't something that we do from an origin perspective. So I'll have to defer to sort of any additional comments that Anna can provide or potentially pick that question up afterwards. But we do have the ability to test cotton that's been blended with synthetics and recycled polyester. So we have ways in which we, an IP that we've developed in order to extrapolate that synthetic component so we can still test the cotton piece. So hopefully that tackles that question. Anna, I'm not sure if you had anything to add.
No, I think I agree with you on the response. I think we're constantly innovating in new areas. I think we just announced our work with timber, and more to come in the coming days. Not to say that in the near future we may not be able to do that, but for now, I think we have the world's largest reference library on cotton, and we specialize in that. We have, as Ben mentioned, managed to develop a proprietary methodology that allows us to not be hampered by blends of other materials that include cotton. And so, where we can help, we are happy to do that. We're not saying where we can do everything.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I think that leads us quite nicely into our next question. So there are other isotopic testing providers offering cotton origin testing. What is it that makes them different from Oritain services?
maybe I'll start, Ben, and if I miss something out, you can add. I mentioned just, just before that Oritain has the world's largest reference library with regards to cotton mapping, and our reference library contains samples that are collected at the farm level, and we have mapped more than 95, or roughly 95% of the world's cotton. I think our confidence levels to our clients are above 90%. And I think that makes a difference when you're looking at, for example, a doctor, and you say, do I want the doctor that can tell me, that I may have cancer by 65, they're 65% certain that you might have cancer, versus another one that can tell you 95% you don't have cancer, or you do have cancer. I think you get what you pay for. I can't say that I've spent too much time with the other forensic origin companies, but I can tell you that Oritain does have some unique capabilities and has spent over 15 years developing that reference library, and they work very hard to maintain it. And some of the samples that they have are important samples that are critical to identifying high risk raw materials from areas that are no longer accessible to new companies that are trying to develop a reference library today. Ben?
Just to add on to that, I think any company that's considering exploration into sort of forensic verification and adding that in as part of their due diligence process, I think that at a full stop is a great starting point. Hopefully we would love that to be with us. We like to think that we have a lot of history and humility with the partners that we work with, and also the regulators that we work with. I think just for me, one of the most important components of isotopic testing is the underlying reference database that you have to test against. Dana gave a great point there. Some of our incredible scientists with many letters ahead of their name have to dumb it down to me. And they sort of put it in a rudimentary example that if you have a TV monitor and there's 10 different pixels, the picture is going to be a little bit muffly. If I have a 4K TV, then I have a very good picture of what I'm looking at. And so again, the importance, the depth, breadth, how those samples are being collected, being at farm level, is absolutely critical, particularly when the insights that you're providing have potentially such an impact. You have to be able to stand behind that result. But any exploration into forensic verification, I think, for the importing community is fantastic.
Thank you so much, Ben, and I'm sure we'll all be glad to have a crystal clear resolution on our supply chains. So next question for you. As folks are evaluating sourcing countries and factories, what is the fastest way for them to gauge risk?
So happy to give a bit of detail on this. I think a multitude of different ways. Would love to say there was any one way. I think it might come from aggregating internal metrics on suppliers that you currently have in that particular country to maybe guide some of your benchmarking or risk profiling for moving additional production there. You can also potentially look at USDA trade data flows, where that cotton's moving into. We've done a lot of work in that to sort of assess and look at some of those trade flows, which might inform the risk of that particular country. So anyone that's listening, a shameless plug, but we would be happy to connect with you and provide a bit of that detail and insight if you wanted to reach out. Also then looking at where enforcement is occurring. CBP does an excellent job in terms of an AAFA actually in providing that information to your members in terms of what are some of the hot spots. I think amalgamating and triangulating that data can really help to understand that general risk profile. But Anna, I'll hand over to you for anything else.
Yeah, I was going to mention that you could easily look at the website to see where there's some concerns and where detentions are coming from. But also, I mean, there's still Department of Labor has documents with regards to where forced and child labor is taking place, looking at where the tariffs are reported as highest. It should be a concern, right? Because if they're high now, it means that the administration feels that there's high risk with goods from those countries. So that is something that I would consider as well.
Thank you so much, Anna. Okay, final question for the presentation. So if a fabric is certified as better cotton, can it be assumed that all tier levels from crop to final fabric production are certified to not have forced labor?
With the time that we have, Anna, do you want to kick off?
Well, I was going to say that I would have a trust but verify a concept with any product, even if we think that we are sourcing something from people that we've previously done business with. I would not say that just their word is enough. Certainly trust but verify, test it. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And I'm not speaking anything about the certification, just about the reality of that is out there and the need to put that level of care and diligence in verifying that the claims that are being made, whether it's about organic or whether it's about certain origins, that should be verified. Ben?
Just to add on to that, we obviously stand behind the social impacts that certifications and accreditations like Better Cotton have. I think it's incredible the work that they do on the ground, but also within the supply chain. I think more broadly, when we look at cotton growths that might be of a premium nature or potentially under some of those certifications, have historically relied on sort of a mass balance based model to be able to prove traceability. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, some of those certifications and traceability have been seen as one, and that is not the case. If you're looking at, and clearly I'm hungry, but if you're looking at the chocolate industry and there's fair trade chocolate, you may have a 12 sort of square chocolate bar that could be 100% fair trade, but there may only be the same amount of two different chunks of chocolate that actually come from fair trade chocolate. It's just that the mass balance and credits have gone through with that particular chocolate bar. So again, that can happen within the textile industry sometimes, and not that this is it happens in every instance, but we can also see certifications and claims like that become a bit of a Trojan horse that, oh, don't worry about that. That's this particular certification. There's transaction certificates, origin certificates, mass balance against that. But to Anna's point, it doesn't necessarily guarantee the origin of the actual raw material that's gone into that.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the analogy, and I think we're now all hungry for chocolate. And so we've had some really excellent questions today, and I do want to thank everyone for their thoughtful participation. If you do have any lingering questions that we didn't get a chance to address, our speakers are happy to follow up directly via email to ensure that any inquiries you may have are answered. So before we close, I'd like to highlight several exciting upcoming events in AAFA's calendar. So you can join us on Thursday, November 20th in Guatemala City, Guatemala for our Western Hemisphere Apparel and Footwear Compliance Conference. At the conference, we'll dive into key areas of compliance, addressing current challenges, and exploring strategies for enhancing operations to meet and exceed compliance standards. Registration is also open for the following 2026 AAFA events. Our Product Safety and Compliance Seminar will take place next February in Long Beach, California, which will be held in conjunction with our Environmental Committee and Social Responsibility Committee meetings. Our Executive Summit will then be hosted at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, D.C. from March 4th through 6th. Our Global Supply Chain and Trade Conference will take place on April 14th through 15th in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Traceability and Sustainability Conference will take place in Denver, Colorado from July 8th through July 9th. In other news, AAFA has joined America250.org, a bipartisan organization leading the 250th commemoration of our country's founding as a supporting partner. Through this partnership, we are celebrating America's heritage through the lens of our industry and how we and our rich immigrant heritage have contributed to our country's resilient tapestry. We will be telling this story all year and encourage all AAFA members to do the same. So with that said, I want to extend our sincere appreciation to our expert speakers, Anna and Ben, for sharing their valuable insights with us today. A special thank you to Oritain for making this session possible, and to each of you for your active participation and engagement. Please do visit their website for more information about Oritain, and do feel free to get in contact with them if you have any more questions. So you will receive an email within 1 to 3 business days with a link to the session recording from today, as well as the presentation slides. We look forward to seeing you at our next event, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Connor.